Chapter 1: A Life of Faith. Amir had always been a man of unwavering faith. Born into a devout Muslim family, his entire life was centered around his belief in Allah and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. Growing up, he attended the mosque regularly, memorized the Quran, and followed the rituals of Islam with devotion and discipline. For Amir, there was no question of truth. Islam was the one and only true religion. His parents had instilled this belief in him from a young age, and the community he was part of reinforced it every day. Amir's daily routine was structured around his religious practices. He would rise before dawn for Fajr, the first of the 5 daily prayers. The cool morning air, the quiet of his home, and the rhythmic recitation of the Quran during prayer provided him with a sense of peace and purpose. It was in these moments that Amir felt closest to Allah, believing that his devotion would surely earn him a place in paradise. After Fajr, he would eat breakfast with his family, discuss the day ahead, and prepare for work. But no matter how busy his day became, Amir never skipped his prayers. Whether at home, in the office, or on the road, he would always find time to stop, face Mecca, and offer his worship to Allah. His devotion extended beyond prayer. Amir was diligent in following the teachings of the Prophet, observing the fast during Ramadan, giving zakat, charity, and abstaining from any activities that were forbidden by Islamic law. He had a firm belief that these actions, combined with his faith in Allah's mercy, would secure his place in Jannah, the eternal paradise promised to the faithful. Amir's confidence in his salvation was unshakable, and he often shared this sense of certainty with friends and family. At the age of 25, Amir had settled into a comfortable life. He worked as a software engineer, a career that allowed him to provide well for his family. Though his job was demanding, Amir never let it interfere with his faith. On Fridays, he would take time off to attend Jumu'ah, the congregational prayer, where the local imam would deliver sermons about the importance of living a righteous life, the consequences of sin, and the rewards awaiting those who remained steadfast in their devotion to Allah. It was during one of these sermons that Amir first heard the imam speak about Jahannam, the Islamic concept of hell. The imam's voice had been strong, filled with the weight of the subject matter as he described the horrors of the afterlife for those who strayed from the path of righteousness. He spoke of fire, suffering, and eternal torment for the disbelievers, the hypocrites, and those who rejected Allah's message. Amir listened intently, his heart steady, knowing that such a fate would never be his. He had done everything right. He had obeyed Allah, followed the teachings of Muhammad, and led a life of moral discipline. For Amir, Jahannam was a distant concept, something that applied to others, those who had rejected Islam or lived a life of sin. Still, the idea of hell lingered in his mind. That evening, as he sat with his family for dinner, the topic of the sermon came up in conversation. Amir's younger sister, Layla, asked about the nature of hell, expressing her fear of being punished in the afterlife. Amir, in his confident and calm manner, reassured her. "Don't worry, Layla," he said, taking a sip of water. "As long as we follow the teachings of Allah and His Prophet, we have nothing to fear. Allah is merciful, and if we live according to His will, we will be rewarded with paradise." Layla smiled, though her unease was still visible. Amir's words had brought her some comfort, but the fear of hell was something she couldn't easily shake. As the conversation shifted to lighter topics, Amir's mind returned to the imam's words. He felt a sense of pride in his faith, in knowing that he was on the right path. Hell was real, but it was not his destiny. But as Amir would soon discover, destiny has a way of unraveling even the strongest beliefs. Chapter 2: The Turning Point. A few months after that conversation with Layla, Amir's life changed in an instant. It was an ordinary Friday, just like any other. He had left work early to attend Jumu'ah at the mosque, greeted his friends afterward, and headed home for lunch. The sun was shining, and there was a sense of contentment in the air. Amir felt blessed, as he always did after prayer. As he drove home, the radio playing soft Quranic recitations, Amir's mind wandered to the weekend ahead. He had plans to meet with his cousins for dinner and spend time with his family. The road was familiar, the route one he had taken hundreds of times. But in an instant, everything changed. A car speeding through a red light collided with Amir's vehicle, the impact sending his car skidding across the road. The sound of metal crunching, glass shattering, and the sudden jolt of pain overwhelmed Amir's senses. He had no time to react. The world around him spun, his vision blurred, and before he could make sense of what had happened, everything went black. In those moments of unconsciousness, Amir's life hung by a thread. The paramedics arrived, pulling his broken body from the wreckage, rushing him to the nearest hospital. His family was notified, rushing to the hospital in tears, praying for his recovery. But Amir, in that moment, was no longer in the realm of the living. His body lay still, his heart beating faintly, but his soul was elsewhere. Amir felt as though he was drifting in a void. There was no sensation of pain, no awareness of his body, just a weightless, floating feeling. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, and for what felt like an eternity, there was only darkness. He couldn't remember the crash, nor could he feel the panic that had overtaken him in those final moments. Instead, there was only a strange, eerie calm. Suddenly, Amir felt himself descending, as if being pulled downward into an abyss. The further he sank, the heavier the air became, thick with heat and an oppressive sense of dread. Confusion flooded his mind. This was not the paradise he had envisioned, not the ethereal gardens of Jannah filled with light and peace. There were no angels, no gentle streams or trees. Instead, there was a growing sense of unease. He began to hear distant cries, agonized wails of pain and despair that grew louder with each passing moment. Then, as though a veil had been lifted, Amir's surroundings came into terrifying focus. He was no longer floating. Instead, he stood on the edge of a vast, fiery chasm, a place so horrifying that it defied all imagination. The sky was a sickening shade of blood red, swirling with ash and smoke. The ground beneath his feet was cracked and blackened, and rivers of molten lava flowed between jagged rocks. The air was thick with sulfur, choking him with every breath he took. But worst of all were the sounds, endless, tortured screams that pierced the air like daggers, echoing off the canyon walls. Amir's heart pounded in his chest. Panic surged through him as he looked around, desperately trying to make sense of what he was seeing. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. He was a good man, a devout Muslim. He had followed every teaching, adhered to every rule. He had lived a life of righteousness, praying to Allah, fasting during Ramadan, and giving to charity. How could he be in hell? This isn't real, Amir muttered to himself, clutching his head in disbelief. It can't be real. But the sight before him offered no comfort, no reassurance that this was some kind of nightmare. It was real, horrifyingly, undeniably real. As Amir took a step forward, he noticed movement in the shadows. His breath caught in his throat as he saw figures emerging from the darkness, their bodies contorted and twisted in unimaginable pain. At first, Amir couldn't understand what he was seeing. But as the figures came closer, his horror deepened. These were people, human souls, writhing in torment. Their skin was scorched and blistered, their faces twisted in agony. Some were chained to pillars of fire, while others were dragged by demonic creatures through pools of molten lava. Their screams were deafening, and their eyes, filled with terror and regret, locked onto Amir as though pleading for help. Amir wanted to look away, but he couldn't. His eyes were drawn to the suffering souls, and a sickening realization began to take hold of him. He recognized some of them. These were people he had known, friends, acquaintances, people from his community. Muslims. People who had shared his faith, who had prayed in the same mosque, fasted during the same holy month, and lived according to the same teachings. They were people who, like him, had trusted in Allah and the words of the Prophet Muhammad. But now, they were here, in hell, suffering the unimaginable consequences of a truth they had refused to see. Why? Amir whispered, his voice shaking. Why are they here? Why am I here? As if in response to his question, one of the tortured souls turned toward him. It was a woman, her face blackened with soot and her eyes filled with despair. Through her cracked, bleeding lips, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. We were deceived, she said, her words broken by sobs. We rejected him. We trusted in a lie, and now we suffer. Amir stumbled backward, his mind reeling. Rejected him? Who was she talking about? There was no other truth but Islam, no other God but Allah. His entire life had been devoted to this belief, to the teachings of the Prophet. How could this be happening? His heart raced as he tried to make sense of the chaos around him. Was this a test? Was Allah punishing him for something? He searched for answers, but the only thing he found was more torment, more suffering, and more confusion. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet began to shake violently, and the air around him grew heavier. A low, rumbling sound filled the atmosphere, growing louder and more ominous with each passing second. Amir's body froze in place, his heart pounding in his chest. Something was coming, something far more terrifying than anything he had yet seen. Out of the smoke and fire, a colossal figure began to emerge, towering over the burning landscape. Its presence was overwhelming, filling the air with a sense of absolute dread. The figure was cloaked in darkness, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. As it stepped forward, the tortured soul scattered in terror, retreating into the shadows. Amir's blood ran cold as he stared at the figure, his body trembling uncontrollably. This was not a man. This was something far more powerful, far more evil. The figure's presence seemed to suck the very life out of the air around him, leaving Amir gasping for breath. Amir, the figure hissed, its voice a deep, guttural growl that reverberated through the chasm. You belong to me now. Amir fell to his knees, overwhelmed by fear. He had never felt so small, so insignificant, so powerless. The figure's eyes burned into him, and for a brief moment, Amir wondered if this was Allah, the God he had worshipped his entire life. "Are you Allah?" Amir stammered, his voice barely audible. "Please, save me." For a moment, the figure was silent. Then, it threw its head back and let out a horrifying, bone-chilling laugh that echoed across the fiery landscape. The sound was so sinister, so filled with malice, that Amir felt his very soul begin to wither. "Allah," the figure sneered, stepping closer. "There is no Allah here. You were mine from the beginning?" Amir's heart shattered as the truth finally hit him. This was not Allah. This was not the God he had worshipped. This was Satan. The realization was like a dagger to his heart, and despair flooded his entire being. Everything he had believed, everything he had dedicated his life to, had been a lie. Satan's form loomed over him, casting a dark, suffocating shadow. Amir could feel the heat of hell intensify as the demon reached out toward him, his massive hand ready to claim him for eternity. But just as Satan was about to strike, a blinding light pierced the darkness. Chapter 3, The Light of Truth. The light was so powerful, so pure, that it illuminated the entire chasm, banishing the darkness and forcing Satan to recoil in fear. Amir shielded his eyes, unable to comprehend the intensity of the brightness that had suddenly surrounded him. It was as though the very essence of life and truth had descended upon hell, and in the presence of that light, all evil shrank away. Satan, who moments ago had been an unstoppable force, now cowered before the light, his once dominating presence shrinking to that of a mere shadow. His hissing voice filled the air with venomous hatred, but he could do nothing against the brilliance that enveloped Amir. Amir, his heart pounding in his chest, looked up in awe. The light was unlike anything he had ever seen, warm, radiant, and filled with a peace that washed over him like a wave. It was as though every fear, every doubt, every shred of despair had been stripped away, replaced by a profound sense of hope. From within the light, a voice spoke, calm, yet filled with authority and power. "Who are you?" Amir asked, his voice trembling as he gazed into the light. "I am the way, the truth, and the life," the voice responded, its words resonating deep within Amir's soul. Amir's eyes widened as the truth of the voice's identity washed over him. This was Jesus, the one he had rejected, the one he had never known. But now, in this moment, Amir knew without a shadow of a doubt that Jesus was real. He was the Savior. And in his presence, even Satan could not stand. Amir's heart pounded as he stared into the brilliant light that surrounded him, the warmth and peace it exuded flooding his soul. Every belief he had clung to, every teaching he had followed, now crumbled beneath the weight of this undeniable truth. Jesus, whom he had been taught to view only as a prophet, was not just a messenger, but something far greater. His very presence radiated power, holiness, and truth. The reality of hell seemed to fade in the presence of this overwhelming light. The tortured cries that had filled the air just moments ago grew distant, the oppressive heat of the fiery chasm no longer suffocating. All that remained was the light, the voice, and the truth that Amir could no longer deny. Satan, who had moments earlier been ready to claim Amir's soul, was now recoiling in fear. The great beast cowered, his once menacing form reduced to a shadowy figure that quaked under the force of the light. His hissing voice echoed across the chasm as he scrambled backward, retreating into the depths of darkness. "No," Satan growled, his voice filled with venom. "He belongs to me." But the light only grew stronger, and Satan shrieked in agony, unable to withstand its purity. In a final, desperate attempt to hold his ground, Satan tried to strike, his dark form lunging toward Amir. But the moment he came into contact with the light, his hand burst into flames, and he let out a horrific scream. Amir watched in awe as the Prince of Darkness, the being he had once thought of as a myth, was driven back, powerless against the light of Jesus. Satan, the embodiment of all evil, who had controlled the fate of so many lost souls, was nothing more than a coward in the presence of true holiness. With a final, pitiful cry, Satan vanished into the shadows, leaving Amir alone with the light. For a long moment, there was silence. Amir could feel the light enveloping him, its warmth filling every corner of his being. For the first time, he truly felt at peace, more at peace than he had ever felt in all his years of devotion to a God he now knew was false. This peace was different, deeper, and purer. It wasn't just the absence of fear, it was the presence of love, truth, and salvation. Amir's mind raced as he tried to process everything that had just happened. He had believed in Allah, trusted in the teachings of Muhammad, and lived a life of religious devotion. And yet, here he was, in hell, face to face with the undeniable truth: Jesus was the way, the truth, and the life. "Who are you?" Amir asked again, his voice filled with awe and trembling. "I am the way, the truth, and the life," the voice replied, echoing with authority and gentleness. "No one comes to the Father except through me." The words struck Amir like a lightning bolt. He had heard those words before, though never in this context. Growing up, he had been taught that Christians had distorted the message of Jesus, that they had misunderstood his role as a mere prophet. But now, in the presence of Jesus himself, Amir understood the full gravity of what he had rejected all his life. The truth was not distorted. The truth was standing before him, offering him a way out of the eternal suffering he had seen around him. Tears welled up in Amir's eyes as the weight of his past decisions pressed down on him. He had spent his entire life following a path that had led him straight to hell. And yet, despite his rejection of the truth, despite his misguided devotion, Jesus had come to save him. "Why?" Amir whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "Why would you save me after I rejected you?" The light seemed to grow even warmer, as if wrapping Amir in a comforting embrace. The voice spoke again, this time softer, filled with a love that Amir could barely comprehend. "Because I love you. I have always loved you, and I died to save you. Even when you rejected me, my love for you never wavered." Amir's tears flowed freely now. He had spent his whole life chasing after a God who had never loved him, who had led him down a path of deception. And here was Jesus, the one true Savior, offering him love, grace, and forgiveness, even though he had never deserved it. "Forgive me," Amir choked out, falling to his knees. "I was blind. I didn't know. Please, forgive me." The light seemed to shine even brighter, as if joy filled the very air around him. And in that moment, Amir felt something incredible, a burden being lifted from his soul. The guilt, the shame, the weight of his wrong beliefs and choices, all of it melted away in the presence of the light. He felt lighter, freer, and for the first time in his life, truly forgiven. "You are forgiven," the voice said, and those words resonated deep within Amir's heart. Suddenly, Amir felt himself being pulled upward, away from the chasm, away from the darkness and the suffering. The fiery landscape of hell faded from view as he ascended into the light. He could no longer feel the oppressive heat, nor hear the tortured cries. There was only peace. Chapter 4, Awakening. Amir's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, he was disoriented. Bright lights filled his vision, but these were not the same lights he had seen moments before. As his senses returned, he realized he was lying in a hospital bed, the steady beeping of machines surrounding him. His body ached, and his head throbbed, but he was alive. "Amir," a voice called softly. He turned his head to see his family gathered around him, his mother, father, sister, and several friends. Tears of relief streamed down their faces as they saw him awaken. "Amir, thank God you're awake," his mother cried, rushing to his bedside. "We thought we'd lost you." Amir blinked, trying to process everything. He had been in an accident. The car crash, it all came back to him now. The last thing he remembered was the impact, the sudden darkness. But what had come after, that was no dream. He had been in hell, and Jesus had saved him. Tears filled Amir's eyes as he looked up at his family. They had no idea what he had just experienced, no idea of the life-changing revelation he had been given. "Mom," Amir said, his voice weak but filled with conviction. "Jesus saved me." His mother frowned, confused. "What do you mean, Amir?" "I saw him," Amir whispered. "I saw hell. I saw Satan, but Jesus saved me. He's the truth. He's the way." His family exchanged worried glances, unsure of what to make of Amir's words. But Amir knew. He had seen the truth, and he would never be the same again. As he lay in that hospital bed, recovering from his injuries, Amir's heart was filled with gratitude. He had been given a second chance, a chance to live in the light of truth, to follow the true Savior. And he knew that from that moment on, his life would be dedicated to Jesus, the one who had saved him from the fires of hell. Chapter 5, A New Life. In the weeks that followed, Amir's physical recovery was slow, but his spiritual transformation was immediate. The experience he had in hell, the sight of those who had rejected Jesus, the confrontation with Satan, and the saving light of Christ, had changed him forever. In the weeks following Amir's awakening, his body gradually healed, but the transformation within him was profound and immediate. Every breath he took, every heartbeat, felt like a gift. The hospital room that once seemed sterile and cold now felt like a sanctuary, a place where he had been reborn. But even as his physical injuries healed, he knew the real journey had just begun. The experience in hell had left a permanent imprint on his soul. The screams of those souls, the oppressive heat, and Satan's mocking laughter still echoed in his mind. But even more powerful was the light, Jesus, who had saved him when all seemed lost. That light now burned in his heart, guiding his every thought. His family and friends, concerned for his well-being, frequently visited him during his recovery. They had noticed a change in Amir, a quiet but unshakable resolve in his demeanor. Gone was the man who had once followed religious practices with robotic obedience, seeking to earn favor with a distant God. In his place was a man filled with peace, a newfound certainty in the truth of Jesus Christ. Yet, Amir's newfound faith was not without its challenges. His family, devout Muslims, struggled to understand what had happened. They had prayed fervently to Allah for his recovery and believed that their prayers had been answered. But Amir's insistence that Jesus had saved him confused and unsettled them. One afternoon, as Amir sat in his hospital bed, his father entered the room. He was a serious man, known for his discipline and devotion to Islam. He pulled up a chair next to Amir and sat in silence for a few moments before speaking. "Amir," his father began, his voice heavy with concern, "I've heard what you've been telling your mother and sister. That Jesus saved you." Amir met his father's gaze, seeing the worry in his eyes. "Yes, Baba. It's true." His father shook his head slowly, trying to process the words. "We have always followed the path of Islam. We prayed for your recovery, and by the grace of Allah, you are still with us. How can you say that it was Jesus who saved you?" Amir took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "Baba, I know this is hard to understand. It was hard for me too. But I need you to believe me when I say this, what I saw wasn't just a dream or a hallucination. I was in hell, Baba. And there were others there, Muslims, people who had trusted in Allah. They were suffering because they rejected Jesus. I saw them with my own eyes." His father's expression tightened, disbelief written across his face. "Hell? Amir, you were in a coma. You had an accident. Your mind was playing tricks on you." "No, Baba," Amir said firmly, his voice filled with conviction. "It was real. More real than anything I've ever experienced. I was face to face with Satan. I thought he was Allah at first, but then I saw him for what he really was. He was ready to claim me, to take my soul, but then Jesus appeared. His light was so powerful, so overwhelming, that even Satan fled from it. Jesus saved me, Baba. And I know now that he is the only way to salvation." The room fell into a heavy silence. Amir's father stared at him, the conflict evident in his eyes. He loved his son dearly, but this was beyond anything he could understand. The teachings of Islam had been the foundation of their family for generations. How could his son suddenly claim that everything they believed was wrong? "Amir," his father said quietly, his voice tinged with sorrow, "you are my son, and I love you. But this path you are choosing, it is dangerous. You are turning your back on everything we have taught you, everything we believe. You are rejecting the truth of Allah." Amir felt a lump form in his throat, but he remained resolute. "I'm not rejecting you or our family, Baba. I love you, and I respect everything you've taught me. But I can't deny the truth. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. I can't unsee what I've seen." His father's eyes filled with sadness, and he stood up slowly. "I need time to think about this, Amir. I don't understand it, and I don't agree with it. But I hope you know that no matter what, I will always be your father." As his father left the room, Amir's heart ached. He knew this was only the beginning of the challenges he would face. His family, his friends, his entire community, everything he had once known and relied upon would be tested by his newfound faith. But despite the pain, Amir felt an unshakable peace. The truth had set him free, and he knew that whatever lay ahead, Jesus would be with him. Chapter 6, Telling his story. Weeks passed, and Amir was finally discharged from the hospital. His body was healing well, but his mind and soul were still adjusting to the profound change he had undergone. He spent many hours in prayer and reflection, reading the Bible for the first time with eyes that saw the truth in its words. But Amir knew that his experience was not meant to stay hidden. He had been given a second chance, and he felt an overwhelming desire to share his story, to tell others about the truth of Jesus Christ. He knew it would not be easy. Many would mock him, others would reject him, and some, like his family, might struggle to accept his testimony. But he could not stay silent. One Sunday, Amir made the decision to visit a nearby church. It was a small, humble building, and as he walked through the doors, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. The pastor, an older man with a kind smile, welcomed him warmly. "Welcome, brother," the pastor said, extending his hand. "What brings you to our church today?" Amir hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to explain everything that had happened. But then, he felt a gentle nudge in his spirit, encouraging him to speak. I'm new to the faith," Amir said. "I've been a Muslim my whole life, but recently, I had a near-death experience. Jesus saved me, and I want to learn more about him. I want to follow him." The pastor's eyes widened slightly in surprise, but he smiled warmly. "That's an incredible testimony, my friend. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. You're welcome here anytime." Over the next few weeks, Amir began attending church regularly, learning more about Jesus and growing in his faith. He met others who had similar stories, people who had once been lost but had found their way to the truth through Christ. It was a community of love, support, and encouragement, and Amir felt like he had finally found his true home. But Amir's journey wasn't just about personal growth. He felt a burning desire to share his story with others, especially those who, like him, had been raised in Islam. He knew the risks. He had heard stories of Christians in Muslim-majority countries being persecuted for their faith. But the truth he had seen was too important to keep hidden. He began by sharing his story online, writing about his near-death experience and the vision of hell he had witnessed. He described the moment he saw Jesus, how Satan had fled before the light, and how he had come to realize that Jesus was the only way to salvation. Some readers were skeptical, others were hostile, but there were also those who were intrigued, people who, like Amir, had questions about their faith and were searching for answers. Chapter 7: A Legacy of Faith. As Amir continued to share his testimony, the reactions varied widely. Many of his friends and acquaintances from his past were shocked and confused. Some outright rejected him, unable to reconcile his newfound faith with the beliefs they had grown up with together. They accused him of betrayal, and there were times when the weight of their disappointment felt unbearable. But Amir found solace in the love and support of his new church community, who embraced him as one of their own. Yet, for every harsh word he received, there were also voices of hope and encouragement. Others began reaching out, expressing their own doubts and questions about their faith. Some were Muslims who felt a similar tug in their hearts, a yearning for truth that had been buried beneath tradition. They were intrigued by Amir's story, and Amir quickly became a beacon of hope for those seeking answers. In the following months, Amir organized small gatherings at the church, where he shared his experience and the truth of Jesus with anyone willing to listen. People from different backgrounds attended, drawn by the sincerity in his voice and the powerful story of redemption he told. Amir emphasized the message of love and grace that Jesus offered, explaining that it wasn't about rejection but rather about embracing a truth that could save. As Amir's influence grew, he was invited to speak at local community events. He spoke not only to Christians but also to interfaith gatherings, where he addressed questions about his transition from Islam to Christianity. With every opportunity, he emphasized the importance of love, compassion, and understanding, encouraging dialogue between different faiths. Through it all, Amir never lost sight of his family. His relationship with his parents remained strained, but he prayed fervently for their understanding and acceptance. He sent them letters, filled with love and hope, explaining his transformation and the peace he had found in Jesus. He shared Bible verses and invited them to join him at church, always maintaining respect for their beliefs while boldly proclaiming his own. One day, after a particularly emotional gathering at the church, Amir received a phone call from his father. His heart raced as he answered, unsure of what to expect. "Amir," his father said, his voice somber, "I've been thinking a lot about what you've shared. I want to understand." Tears filled Amir's eyes as he heard those words. It was the opening he had been praying for. "Thank you, Baba. I would love to talk with you. Can we meet?" They arranged to meet at a local cafe, a neutral space where Amir could share his heart without the heaviness of their home's expectations. As they sat across from each other, Amir felt the weight of anticipation and hope. "Tell me about Jesus," his father said, his expression curious yet guarded. Amir spoke openly, recounting his experience in hell, the love of Jesus, and the joy he had found in his new faith. He explained that he still loved his father and respected their family's traditions, but that he could not turn away from the truth he had discovered. As the conversation unfolded, Amir's father listened intently, his expression softening. They spoke for hours, discussing faith, beliefs, and the nature of truth. Amir's heart swelled with hope, knowing that this was the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship. Epilogue: A life transformed. Over the years, Amir continued to share his testimony, traveling to different churches and communities, speaking about the power of faith and the love of Jesus. His story became a catalyst for many seeking truth, bridging gaps between different cultures and beliefs. He wrote a book detailing his experience, which resonated with countless readers, helping them explore their own journeys of faith. Amir's family began to see the changes in him and slowly started to accept his faith. His parents, though still rooted in their beliefs, opened their hearts to the idea that Amir's faith could coexist with theirs. They began to have open dialogues, exploring their differences while respecting their love for each other. Eventually, Amir's mother joined him at church one Sunday, a moment filled with anticipation and hope. As she sat beside him, tears in her eyes during the worship, Amir realized that God was working in ways he could never have imagined. Amir's life became a testimony not just of transformation, but of the power of love to heal and bridge divides. He had gone from darkness to light, from despair to hope, and in the process, he had found purpose. His journey was not merely about his salvation but about sharing the light of Christ with others. As Amir stood in front of a congregation one day, sharing his story, he could feel the warmth of the light he had once encountered in hell. It was a light that spoke of love, truth, and redemption, a light he was determined to carry into the world for as long as he lived. In the end, Amir understood that faith was a journey, not a destination. Each day was a new opportunity to walk in the light, to share the truth, and to love others unconditionally. And he was committed to living out that truth, a living testament to the grace that had saved him.